So, Mr. Hitchcock, we meet at last. For someone who loves film and reviews them on YouTube, I haven't seen any Alfred Hitchcock films to date, but this special film review open challenge selection means that now I get to watch one of the Master of Suspense's movies. My first impressions based on the trailer were that Hitchcock has a really big opinion of himself, and also, look how different trailers are compared to today. This film was released in 1954 and stars James Stewart and Grace Kelly. This makes Rear Window the oldest film I've reviewed to date by some way. But Hitchcock's one of the greatest directors of all time, right? This film should totally hold up, right? Well, let's find out. Here's my review of Rear Window. It's a hot summer in New York, and photographer L.B. Jeffries, or Jeff for short, is 6 weeks into a 7-week recovery after injuring himself on a photography assignment for the magazine he works for. He spends his days either being treated by insurance nurse Stella, visited by his girlfriend Lisa, or watching his neighbours out of the rear window. People like Mrs. Lonelyhearts, the songwriter in the studio apartment, and the salesman and his wife who's confined to her bed. One night during a heavy rainstorm, Jeff hears a scream and smash, but can't see anything. Through the night he keeps waking up and seeing the salesman leave with his big silver sample case each time. During the next few days, Jeff watches the apartment carefully and talks to both Stella and Lisa about his concerns, thinking that the salesman, real name Lars Thorwald, has killed his wife Anna. Initially, the women don't think there's much to this, but the more they see themselves, and the more Jeff convinces them, the more they believe that Lars killed his wife Anna. They see things like Anna's jewellery being left behind, saws, knives, rope, and a large trunk being shipped away, along with the neighbour's dog sniffing around Lars's flowers. Jeff decides to call in detective friend Thomas Doyle to investigate, who discovers that Anna has been sent to the country. The lease is up on the apartment, people saw her leave, and she even sent a postcard from the country to her husband. As far as Doyle is concerned, there is no case, but Jeff, Lisa and Stella are not convinced. One night, whilst Lisa is staying over, one of the neighbours screams as the dog has been found strangled in the garden. Everyone comes out as the owners of the dog shout and cry, all but Lars Thorwald. Jeff manages to get Lars out of the apartment by pretending to blackmail him, while Stella and Lisa dig up the garden looking for evidence. After they don't find any, Lisa takes it upon herself to investigate the Thorwald's apartment. Jeff is supposed to be on lookout but misses that Lars returns. He calls the police as Lars catches Lisa in his apartment. The police arrive and Lisa is arrested, but signals to Jeff that she managed to get hold of Anna's wedding ring, a key piece of evidence that Anna is no longer alive and well. Lars, however, sees the signal and then spots Jeff spying on him. Doyle is filled in on what's happening over the phone, but then Lars comes to visit Jeff. Jeff, wheelchair bound, tries to defend himself using a flashbulb, but Lars overpowers him and drops him out of the window, where he's caught by 2 police officers who've just arrived. Lars is caught and confesses to everything. Doyle arrives with Lisa to check on Jeff, who has broken his other leg in the fall, but otherwise has survived. The Master of Suspense, a cinematic masterpiece, a critical darling. Do I agree? Yes, it's great. My simplified plot synopsis skips over a lot of depth, which fits in really well with the main story. Jeff at the beginning is considering letting Lisa go as he thinks that she's too perfect, too good for him, and is not willing to give up his travelling photographer gig, which doesn't fit in well with her high society lifestyle. By the end, the events have brought the two together, but the conversations, discussions or arguments they have about this issue are great. A lot of information is given in natural sounding conversation between these two and with Stella, a no-nonsense nurse who acts almost as Jeff's confidant. Her thick New York accent is a contrast to Lisa's transatlantic accent, but the two never clash. Kelly's accent threw me off initially. I couldn't place it, but a small amount of research states that a lot of actresses used an accent like this in early cinema. It's something you rarely see nowadays, and as someone who hasn't seen a lot, if any, film in this era, it really caught me off guard. As did the other thing that caused my ears to prick up, 1950s attitudes to women. Now, I'm not going to dwell on this too long. It's an attitude shift from nearly 70 years ago, but the way women are spoken to or about may not sit well with your modern standards if you haven't seen this before and are planning to now. It's not a deal breaker by any means, it just reminds me of those disclaimers on old sitcoms about how jokes back then may be offensive now. I like James Stewart as Jeff and Grace Kelly as Lisa, and you can see why these two were really big stars of their time, even if things like soft focus on close-ups on Kelly are now outdated. The supporting cast all do well too. The songwriter doesn't really have any lines but mimes what he goes through well. Miss Torso acts as a distraction, doesn't really add up to much other than eye candy for Jeff. But for me, the one who elicits sympathy without any lines whatsoever is Miss Lonely Hearts. We see her having dinner by herself but pretending to have company before breaking down in tears, bringing a date home who's a little bit too handsy and gets kicked out, and later contemplating suicide, which distracts Jeff long enough to miss Lars coming home. Judith Evelyn is great at portraying this character, and I'm glad that Miss Lonely Hearts and the songwriter got together in the end. It's a subplot I'm really into. The songwriter provides the main music for the film. It relies on street noises and natural sounds as ambience. It's because of this that Hitchcock literally got me sitting on the edge of my seat by the end. The background noises fade out as we hear Lars' footsteps heading up to the door. The light outside blacks out, and we don't see Lars until Jeff uses the flashbulb to try and blind him. I wouldn't be surprised if this sequence was the inspiration for Five Nights at Freddy's sister location. The film had me hooked, and I genuinely didn't know if Lars was guilty or not right up until the moment he confesses. This, however, leads me to the other aspect that's dated badly: the effects. They work for the most part, and I love the fact that we never leave the apartment, really building up the isolation of Jeff. But when Jeff is about to be thrown and then is thrown from the window, it doesn't look good by today's standards. The neighbours appear to move in fast forward, and the effect of the fall has dated really badly. I'm spoiled these days, but I have to review this film as it is. I read somewhere there was a 1998 remake starring Christopher Reeve, though why would he stay in one place? Surely he'd just fly over to the other apartment, unless of course the cast is made out of kryptonite. Rear Window was nominated for 4 Oscars, including Best Director. Unfortunately, Alfred Hitchcock lost out to Elia Kazan for a film called On the Waterfront. In fact, despite being nominated for Best Director 5 times in his life, he never won it. His films won other awards, but never Best Director. As far as Rear Window goes though, I'd say that if you're a fan of the history of cinema, then you owe it to yourself to see it. It's aged badly in terms of attitudes and effects, but everything else absolutely holds up. Hitchcock has earned the title of Master of Suspense for this film certainly, and I really enjoyed looking at an older film and enjoying this more than quite a lot of newer films. This film alone has made me curious on other Alfred Hitchcock movies, and when a film that's nearly 70 years old does that, it's something special. Thank you so much for nominating this one, and I really hope you enjoyed this review. So as I said in my last review of The Shining, the next selection for the Film Review Open Challenge is Mars Attacks. For now though, thank you very much for watching.